Imagine being inside that house. The room is packed. The people are standing shoulder to shoulder. Others are crowded around the door, trying to hear Jesus. Then suddenly, you hear something above you. Scraping, digging. Pieces of the roof began falling into the room. Everyone looks up. And slowly, a paralyzed man is lowered through the opening. 4 people loved this man enough to carry him through the town, lift him onto a roof, and tear that roof open, because they believed Jesus could help him. When love couldn't get through the door, it tore open the roof. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to The Word is Given. I am Rick, the Divine Scribe. Today we are exploring the Gospel of Mark, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And this story challenges what people thought they understood about healing, forgiveness, and spiritual authority. Mark begins by telling us that a few days later, Jesus returned to Capernaum. When people heard that he had come home, they began gathering around him. That expression caught me off guard. I always thought that Jesus was from Nazareth. So why does Mark say that Jesus had come home? From what I could discover, Mark probably wasn't saying that Jesus had been born or raised in Capernaum. Capernaum seems to have become a home base for his ministry, and many believe Jesus may have been staying at Simon Peter's house. It was a place where Jesus could return and rest before traveling again to teach and heal. But once people heard that Jesus was back, there wasn't much opportunity for him to rest. The house filled up quickly. There were so many people that no room remained, not even outside the door, and Jesus began preaching the word to them. Then 4 men arrived, carrying a paralyzed man on a mat. We don't know much about these men. We don't know whether they were his friends, his relatives, or perhaps a little bit of both. But we do know this: they refused to give up on him. They carried him all the way to the house, only to discover that they couldn't get near Jesus. The crowd was too large. The doorway was blocked. Now, they could have stopped there. They could have said, "We tried. We did everything we could. Maybe we'll come back some other time." But they didn't. Somehow they got the man onto the roof. Homes in that time often had flat roofs that could be reached by outside steps. These men began removing the roof material and digging an opening above Jesus. Could you imagine somebody being inside that house? Dust and pieces of the roof began falling around you. Everyone is looking up, including Jesus. And then a man on a mat is lowered into the room. I have to wonder what Simon was thinking. After all, it may have been his roof. They were tearing it apart. Was he angry? Was he worried about who would repair it? Mark doesn't tell us. There are some details I would really like to know. But that is part of what makes Mark unique. He keeps the story moving. He gives us what we need and takes us directly to the heart of the moment. Mark tells us that Jesus saw their faith. He spoke to the paralyzed man. Notice that wording. Jesus saw their faith. Not only the faith of the man on the mat, but the faith of the people who carried him. Their faith could have been seen in what they were willing to do. They carried him. They climbed. They dug. And they lowered their friend into the presence of Jesus. This wasn't a quiet faith. Hidden somewhere inside them, it was love, with dirt under its fingernails. But then Jesus said something nobody seemed to expect. He looked at the paralyzed man and said, "Son, your sins are forgiven." I wonder how the man felt when he heard those words. He had been brought there because he couldn't walk. Perhaps everyone expected Jesus to heal his body immediately. Instead, Jesus began with forgiveness. And some of the teachers of the law were sitting nearby, thinking to themselves, with a slightly suspicious tone in their mind, why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Their concern was serious. To them, Jesus was claiming an authority that belonged to God alone. But Jesus immediately knew in his spirit what they were thinking in their hearts. He asked them, "Why are you thinking these things?" Then Jesus asked a question. Which is easier? To say to this paralyzed man, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Get up, take your mat, and walk"? Think about that. Forgiveness is invisible. Anyone could say that someone's sins were forgiven. How could the people in the room see whether it had happened? But if Jesus told a paralyzed man to walk, everyone would immediately see whether his words carried authority. Jesus was about to make the invisible visible, basically. He was going to use the healing they could see to reveal an authority they could not see. Jesus said, "I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." Then he turned to the paralyzed man and he said, "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home." And the man got up. Imagine that moment. Perhaps legs that had not supported him for years began to move. He stood, he bent down, and he picked up the very mat that had carried him into the house. Then he walked out, in full view of everyone. The crowd that had prevented him from entering now had to make room to watch him leave. He entered the house being carried by 4 people. He left carrying his own mat. the thing that had once carried him became something he could carry himself. That is quite a transformation. Mark tells us that everyone was amazed. They praised God and said, "We have never seen anything like this." And they hadn't. They had witnessed more than physical healing. They had seen compassion. They had seen forgiveness. They had seen friendship. They refused to surrender. And they had seen a kind of spiritual authority they did not know how to explain. The story also makes me think about traditional beliefs. Some of us were taught that questioning religious tradition was dangerous. We were taught to accept certain ideas without examining them. But what happens when tradition becomes so rigid that it cannot recognize healing, even while healing is happening right in front of it? The teachers of the law were so focused on what Jesus was allowed to say that they nearly missed what was happening to the man beside them. Jesus didn't appear to humiliate these men, but he did challenge the limits of their thinking. He gave them and us a new way to understand forgiveness and authority. I grew up surrounded by traditional thinking. I'm guessing many of you did too. For quite some time, I have been searching, questioning, and looking at some beliefs in a different way. I questioned some of the things that I was taught. And I'm still here. I'm still searching. I'm still learning. Nothing terrible happened to me, but I asked honest questions. In fact, those questions have helped me move away from fear and closer to love. Maybe faith isn't always quietly accepting what we have been told. Maybe sometimes faith asks us to carry someone. Sometimes it asks us to question an old assumption. Sometimes it asks us to find another way inside. Sometimes faith waits patiently at the door. And sometimes love climbs onto the roof. What do you think that this story is saying to us? Do you see it as a story about healing, forgiveness, friendship, or questioning the limits of traditional thinking? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. You don't have to agree with everything I say. It's okay. I don't bite. We all are in this together. Your opinion matters, as long as we speak to one another respectfully. If you enjoyed this content, please hit like and subscribe. I would truly love to hear from you. I'm Rick, the Divine Scribe. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.